Entrepreneurs take risks. They pour money, time, and effort into ventures that may or may not pay off. They're also controversial. Some people see them as brave, creative pioneers forging ahead to make a better future for others. Some regard them as self-serving capitalists looking to get rich at our expense. Who's right? Is the entrepreneur's work essentially virtuous or vicious? These are not idle questions. In the 20th century, the destinies of entire nations depended in part on how they viewed the entrepreneur. Morgan grew up in rural Michigan. For as long as he can remember, he wanted to work for himself. When he was 26, he leased a small dairy farm. 5 years later, he managed to buy the land with a loan from the bank.
Our county extension agent, wonderful man, Jerry Lindquist. First year he was in business. He come here, evaluated the books, looked at our financial statement, and he looked me right square in the eye and he says, "You're broke. Get out. You cannot possibly make it." And I looked right back at him and I says, "What have we got to do to get this right?" Well, at that point in time, the average rolling herd average for this county was like 14 or 15,000 pounds of milk per cow. He says, "Brad, in order for this thing to float, you've got to be well over 20,000 pounds of milk per cow." Well, at that particular time, there was only one herd in Osceola County that had that kind of production. By the second year, we was the top producing herd in Osceola County, and by the third year, we was the 6th highest producing herd in the state of Michigan. So, out of necessity, you put your butt in the corner, you'd be surprised what you can achieve.
For over 10 years, the Morgans led the region in milk production per cow. But then in 1999, a new problem arose. Milk prices plummeted. They were again in danger of losing their farm. Morgan began looking around for an unexploited resource.
Sometimes they're the most common resources that we walk over, that we ignore, that we even are perhaps repulsed by, that become the source of wealth, the source of jobs, the source of prosperity.
We always bought our feed here, so we had to find a way to dispose of the manure. It was costing me about $25,000 a year to dispose of the manure. Well, my father and I was talking, and basically I says, "Dad," I says, "I've done some research on this, and I think we can compost this manure, and I think we can make it a marketable product." So we contacted Michigan State, and they come in and did some studies and did all of this, and they told us, yes, we could, and we could probably sell it at $3 a yard. Well, at $3 a yard, the cost of production is $9 a yard. This just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They basically told me that it was pretty much unachievable. The value of the product wouldn't be there. That I was a little independent, a little peg-headed, a little stubborn. We decided that there was a better market out there. To question developing a new marketplace for a product that hasn't even been developed yet, to me, I think people are pretty narrow-minded when they draw the line that quick.
The moral aspect of entrepreneurship is that it requires certain moral virtues if it's going to happen. It requires persistence. It requires the ability to be patient.
Another trait I think that would be required would be persistence, or what classically would be called perseverance. Being able to take another breath and move on. Faith enables one to do this at the darkest moment, to hold on, to hold steady, to go through, to keep going, to believe in your vision enough and to not fatigue, not to run short. How sad it is, you know, for people to go right to the point and then lose heart.
Most of the equipment was already here and available. We obviously had the property, we had the raw feedstocks, we had tractor, we had skid steer, and we started composting.
We haul in dairy manure and we stockpile it on a cement pad. And then come spring, we'll take the racetrack straw and mix it together with the dairy manure. It'll actually start heating in the pile, so it'll start breaking down for us when it's in the pile. And then after that, we'll take it and we'll put it into a windrow. A windrow is a long pile that's about 6 feet wide by 4 feet high, about 100 yards long.
For the composting business, I turn the compost.
We turn the windrows because the living organisms in there need the oxygen. We turn it about once every 3 days.
If every time she turns it, you lose that much steam off from that windrow, that's moisture leaving the system. Now, unless it's replenished, sooner or later that product just dries right out. That windrow right there, I mean, it's still got plenty of moisture in there. I mean, when you can ball it, throw it up there and it just barely breaks up, that's about perfect.
We're speeding up this process from what everybody thought it would take 2 years, and we're doing it in 60 days.
Along the way, Morgan hired Joe Scrimger, a consultant with expertise in soil biology.
I've never paid somebody so much money to be such a critic. But the one thing that Joe brought to the table is, if you're going to market a product, don't accept average. You have to create a product that is better than anybody else can make. What Joe would do is he would basically come in and he would test it, he would analyze it, he would scrutinize it, and to the point to where he's almost offensive. And I'd write him another check. And I'd write him another check. Because as I started watching our process, as we was learning, he was learning. As we was learning, he was challenging us to do more. And consequently, it shows up in the marketplace. We've developed 8 different product lines, and now we're even growing that into probably be 10 or 12 by the end of the season. The Dairy Dew obviously is our base product. We've got that kind of down to a science. The Dairy Dew is basically calf pen manure, dairy cow, any kind of manure that we can get out of a dairy herd or a beef herd. We probably take this to a level that nobody else has probably looked at, and we're probably a little more meticulous about it. We can make a very nice compost, and it's a lot more stable than what most people even recognize. If we're going to go through this much time and effort, this much energy to make a product, we feel we have to be the best on the marketplace. It's interesting. That's the thing, it's fun. When you can take a raw product that had no value and turn it into a product that has extreme value in the marketplace, from large production agriculture to small production agriculture to homeowner to garden, golf courses, it's wide open.
If you want to be an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, what you must do is focus on what other people need, want, desire, and try to serve it better or in a new way with value added in a way nobody else has. So in that sense, an entrepreneur must be other-directed. You must be watching your fellow human beings.
You know, people often describe capitalists as very self-centered and greedy, and certainly there are such beings. Of course, you don't have to be a capitalist to be greedy and self-centered. You know, you can do that in any economic sphere. But entrepreneur qua entrepreneur, as entrepreneur, has to be other-regarding, has to be looking to see what are the needs of the consumer.
Many in the composting business accept government subsidies to collect farm waste and turn it into low-grade compost. Brad Morgan took a different tack. He worked to create a line of high-quality compost tailored to specific farming and gardening needs. That meant risking more capital up front. But in the end, it paid off. After 10 years, the Morgan's business is still expanding. He now partners with other farmers to meet the growing demand for his compost.
Well, our goals when we first started this business, we felt if we could sell $30,000 worth of product, we would be just tickled pink. Our goals for this year will be well over $1.5 million. That's not a big company, but there's an opportunity out there.
If you think about the way in which media portrays business people, inevitably it is the greedy, rapacious, the superficial, literature, magazines.
Even Adam Smith, the great champion of capitalism, was no fan of the businessman. A university professor, he regarded the rising class of tradesmen and merchants as self-serving and greedy.
Even though Adam Smith acknowledged the moral prerequisites of a successful capitalism, he at the same time casually denounced capitalists. Never did they assemble except to conspire against the public. And you certainly couldn't depend on their moral qualities to deliver your bread. You had to depend on their self-interest.
Today, many of our religious leaders depict the business class in even harsher terms.
I think the history of corporate America is the history of huge economic units that uncontrolled will pollute our atmosphere, will move factories from community to community to maximize profit, even though it destroys communities as they leave unemployed behind.
This is what is wrong in our international global economy, that the wealth of the world goes from the poor to the rich. The rich get richer and richer, and the poor get poorer and poorer.
When you listen to your priest or your minister talk, what you often hear is something like this. I'm exaggerating, of course, but if you have money, you should give to the church and give to other good causes in order to justify it. If you actually made the money yourself, there's something faintly dirty about that, a little suspicious about that, as if you couldn't earn a fortune without cheating others, without exploiting others.
Many people look at entrepreneurs and say that fundamentally they must be motivated by greed. Sure, there are greedy entrepreneurs, but there are also greedy lawyers, greedy doctors, and greedy trade unionists.
Max Weber had a wonderful line. He said, people who think that the essence of capitalism is greed are in the kindergarten of economic history. He said, greed is universal.
An entrepreneur is a person who sees things that other people don't, but is also creative with what they see. Someone who can organize things and other people around them so as to achieve the new object that is in mind.
The entrepreneur's success seems inevitable after the fact, but the risks of launching a new enterprise are real.
You know, a lot of people don't realize that for entrepreneurs, they very often, more often than not, place their entire well-being at risk in order to produce something that they don't even know they have a market for yet. They have to be so convinced of their idea that they will, and how many entrepreneurs mortgage their homes in order to finance the first beginnings of their enterprise. That's an admirable trait.
4 out of every 7 new enterprises fail. And people lose their shirts. They lose everything they have. What entrepreneurs really do is put what they earn at risk behind something new, something different, where they could lose it all, and do it over and over and over again.
Some entrepreneurs help share the risk of new business ventures while also providing needed capital. These may be the most vilified of all entrepreneurs, the moneylenders.
Entrepreneurs often have great ideas, Many entrepreneurs often, however, don't have the necessary capital that they need to be able to make an idea into reality. What banks do is provide entrepreneurs with the capital that they need to turn ideas into reality and to create new wealth.
Frank Hanna is a successful merchant banker who first learned about business and the value of hard work from his father.
When I was a child, my brother and father and I didn't go hunting and fishing like a lot of kids do with their fathers. We would wake up on Saturday mornings and we'd go to the office with him, and then we'd go around and look at real estate. He would have a duplex or something like that. We'd collect rent, and we would mow the lawns and do maintenance work. And in between, he would teach us about business.
Hanna later pursued a degree in law, but even as a young attorney, he viewed his work through the lens of business.
It's a particular bent and way of looking at things. I practiced law for 2 years before going into business. And after about 6 months, I had figured out the compensation structure of the law firm, which was top secret. But I went in and talked to a young partner one day, and he said, "How do you know all this? You know more about this than I do." I said, "Well, this is a business. It's a law firm, but it's a business. And if I'm going to be in this business, I need to understand it. I need to know how people are compensated, what kind of incentives are within the law firm, how do we bring in business, that sort of thing." I was fascinated with the business. So many people I know who are entrepreneurs, there's a piece of engineer within them. There's a piece of little boy who wants to know, how does this thing work?
He soon put his talent for business to work. Frank and his brother David developed models to analyze and minimize the risk of making various loans. Then they pooled their savings of $160,000 for a down payment to borrow a much larger sum of money. A loan they used to purchase a bundle of loans. The borrowers were now the lenders. Their strategy eventually paid off, and they continued making highly leveraged investments, borrowing large sums of money that they would then lend to others. Through such financial engineering, the company they founded now manages over $2.7 billion. The economic value of such work may not be obvious.
My daughter spent time with me this summer, working with me, seeing what I do. So she's watching me make calls and speak to people and read material. And we go to lunch after a couple of days, and she said to me, "When do you make the money?" And the fact is, first of all, you don't make the money. Hopefully you create wealth, and money is a representation of some of the wealth that is created. But I thought long and hard about it. What does a capitalist do? A capitalist gathers lots and lots and lots of information. Because generally speaking, the more information you have, the less uncertainty you have about what's going to happen. So you gather a lot of information and you sift through it and you discern it and you spend a lot of time thinking about it. And then at the end of the day, the capitalist makes a decision as to where the capital that he is a steward of, as to where that capital should be employed. If he makes good decisions, then he increases the wealth that is there because the capital gets used like a tool in an effective manner. If he makes bad decisions, he won't be making those decisions for very long because the market will not continue to put capital in his stewardship.
Every small business that started with a loan is connected to people like Frank Hanna. If these moneylenders fail to make wise investments, they have to charge far more interest to stay in business. But if they're skillful, they can lower interest rates, enabling countless men and women to launch new enterprises.
A farmer could till a very small plot of land until he saved enough money to buy a tractor. Or he can take an act of faith and hope in the future that he can borrow money to buy a tractor now, and thereby go ahead and start being much more productive today rather than 10 years from now when he saved enough money to buy the first tractor. Now, what makes that possible? Well, in past days, he might be able to go down the road and borrow money from another farmer to buy the tractor, but the fact is that farmer doesn't have enough money to lend to him. And even if he goes to a cooperative, the cooperative is much more limited in how much money they can lend because they don't have enough of a universe to draw from to diversify the risk. What risk? Well, the farmer who borrows to use the tractor, he may not be successful, but it's worth taking a risk on him if we can spread the risk over thousands and thousands of people. And that's what happens here in New York City. Whether it is credit cards, mortgages, or tractors on a farm, we take all of these credit instruments that are used to buy houses or tractors, and we pool millions of them together such that when someone doesn't pay back, no one bears the entire brunt of that. And that process makes the entire extension of credit, the cost of the lubrication, it drops it dramatically. And more important, it makes it much more available for many, many more people. And so the farmer, who in the past, it didn't matter how much he was willing to pay for the credit, he could not get it. Today, he can get it. He can walk into the dealership and buy a tractor.
Not everyone sees the work of bankers and investors in such a positive light.
There was a famous movie called Wall Street with Michael Douglas, and he portrayed a guy named Gordon Gekko, who acted as if the whole thing's just one big slot machine or one big craps table, and it's a zero-sum game.
It's not a question of enough, pal. It's a zero-sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses. Money itself isn't lost or made. It's simply transferred from one perception to another, like magic.
And that might be the most insidious misinterpretation of a market that there is.
The richest 1% of this country owns half our country's wealth, $5 trillion. 1/3 of that comes from hard work. 2/3 comes from an inheritance, interest on interest accumulating to widows and idiot sons. And what I do, stock and real estate speculation. It's bull. You got 90% of the American public out there with little or no net worth. I create nothing. I own.
A zero-sum game is like poker. We all sit down at a table, and I only win if someone else loses. That's not the way a market works. That's not the way the wealth of New York City has been built. It didn't all come from someone else. It was created. I might argue that there are two key fundamental principles of all of financial theory and analysis. One is the time value of money, and the other is understanding the benefits of diversification of financial risk.
The risk-sharing entrepreneur can look mundane beside entrepreneurs who invent new technologies, but the risk sharers have played a pivotal role in history.
I would make the argument that but for financial engineering and financial risk management, the United States of America is not what it is today. I'm not sure it ever gets discovered as it got discovered. The thing that allowed more and more ships to come to the United States was insurance. When a ship would set sail from Europe, it was a very, very hazardous undertaking. And very few people, other than royalty, other than Queen Isabella in the case of Columbus, could finance it because the risk that the ship and all of its cargo would go down was so great that no one could afford to bear that risk on their own. What happened in England with Lloyd's of London was that an insurance industry was set up whereby the risk of all of these ships going down was shared in a cooperative fashion. Through financial engineering, there was somebody sitting in a back room getting paid very well because they were analyzing statistic after statistic after statistic of all of the accidents at sea and making calculations as to what those risks were, and then charging insurance premiums to the companies that wanted to sail to the New World. And by spreading that risk, one might think, what is that person in the back room, of what benefit are they to the economy? But that analysis, that engineering that took place, helped the New World be discovered. Because all of a sudden, more and more people taking risk in Europe could sail to the New World without fear of catastrophic loss, because their risk was now shared with everyone else who was sailing to the New World. And thus that financial engineering emboldened people to take these ventures, and in fact enabled the New World to be discovered at a pace that never would have happened but for those people in the back room managing risk.
The great economic evil is the belief in a zero-sum economy, that the good fortune of others comes at your own expense, because then of course it justifies any kind of violence against others. It fosters envy. Rather than celebrating the successes of others, you envy them and you petition to government to restrict and suppress the successful. And all around the world, it's led to the greatest horrors and catastrophes, an attack on the successful, the middlemen, the entrepreneurs.
When we demonize the entrepreneur, the creative person, we create a perception. At that point, what we do, and the phrase for it is, kill the golden goose. We see the golden eggs that are laid, and we think if we can kill the golden goose, we can get rid of the goose and get inside to all the eggs. The fact is, when you kill the golden goose, you kill all the golden eggs too.
Few stories better illustrate the tragic effects of vilifying the business class than the story of Jimmy Lai. Born in 1948 in the Guangdong province of southern mainland China, Jimmy Lai was 5 when Mao Zedong's communist revolution reached his village. The Lai's property was stripped away and their family life decimated.
It was a very confused time for a kid. I didn't know what was going on. I was maybe 4. Well, we were unfortunate because our family was rich family. So naturally, when you're rich, you become the enemy of the people. When I knew anything, I knew that the adults were very busy, either being sent to labor camp. For instance, my mother only came back during weekends to take care of us. After weekends, she had to go back to labor camp. And at that time, me and my twin sister and my elder sister, only the 3 of us were still in Canton in the house. So we were young kids left with us. We had to cook ourselves, and then on all that, we just had to survive, struggle as a kid. Although, luckily we were kids, we didn't know anything better.
When Jimmy Lai was 9, he was given a job carrying luggage in a railway station in Guangzhou.
When you live in a communist country, surrounded by all the lies, how horrible, how hellish the outside world is, you're scared about the outside world. You don't know what the real fact is outside, where you live. But working in the railway stations gave me the privilege to access people who come from outside. Those guys who come from outside became an information carrier of the outside world. I can see people, how well they dress, how well they speak, and how well they treat us. That I was never treated like this in China, because people who had to work in a railway station, carry the bags, are people who are marginal people. It was an experience that was very educational for me. It changes my purview of the world. One day I was carrying the baggage for a guy. After he gave me some tips, he fell into his pocket and gave me a bar of chocolate. I had the bar of chocolate in my hand. I turned, and I was so hungry, I turned and I bite, and it was so tasteful. It was amazing. So I turned and I asked him. I said, "What's this? It's chocolate." I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Hong Kong." I said, "Hong Kong must be heaven because I never taste anything like that." So that triggered my determination to go to Hong Kong. And then from that day on, I passed to my mother to allow me to escape.
While millions of people in communist China were starving, Hong Kong was booming. Two things that distinguished Hong Kong from mainland China during this period were its support for property rights and the rule of law.
Communist China in the 1950s and 60s had a command and control economy in which entrepreneurial decisions and visions and choices were not preserved or not respected. Hong Kong, on the other hand, had a minimal provision for laws and justice, what some have called governance of benign neglect, which created space for the entrepreneurial visions of millions of people.
The biggest impediment to economic growth is when people feel the threat of confiscation of their gains from wealth-creating activity through either government or other private actors. And so, for example, in the third world, there's a lack of stability from both the government confiscating your wealth and your neighbor confiscating your wealth. So that drives you underground or drives you in this very short-term horizon. So we get markets in all throughout the world, but they're like bazaar markets, street trading levels and things like that, rather than longer-term investment projects that are wealth-creating.
When no one can rely on the rule of law and the rights of property, pure logic tells you not to invest too much of your time and energy and resources into any property because you have no assurance that any fruit ever comes from that.
The wealthiest places on the planet are those places where the productive capacity of a person is increased, and those places are the places with the least regulation and the least taxation. So it seems to me that's what you want to do internationally, is create societies where there is the least regulation on human creativity. Allow people to do that within sane boundaries where people are not allowed to kill each other, are not allowed to steal from each other, have their disputes settled on the basis of courts and law, but to minimize the actions of bureaucrats and politicians and the state and maximize the creativity of business people.
I think Adam Smith summed it up best when he said that you could move from the lowest form of barbarism to the highest form of opulence, that all you need is peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice.
If we stifle the initiative and the creativity of the entrepreneur to a certain point, they'll walk away from the opportunity. They'll move to some other place that has more opportunity because the creative impulse is still there.
The boy, Jimmy Lai, knew nothing of economic theory. But in the train station in Guangzhou, he tasted freedom for the first time.
I started to pester my mother about allowing me to escape to Hong Kong when I was 11 and a half. So it took me a year to convince her. She always said that, that going to Hong Kong is like you going to the moon, because I would never see you again. She thought that I would never be able to go back, and she would never go to Hong Kong to see me. And she was very reluctant to allow me to go to Hong Kong, but finally I did, and when I was 12 and a half.
Lai knew a policeman who helped him get a visa to the Macau territory on the southern coast of China. He made the journey that night. Some of the fishermen there were part of a smuggling operation where freedom and profit met.
I was put in the bottom of the junk and fishing junk together with like maybe 100, maybe 80, I don't remember. We were crammed together. And after a few hours, they allow us, when they see no boat, they allow us to have some fresh air, and then went back to the bottom, and everybody vomiting because, And by the afternoon, we arrived in Kowloon, and at that time, when you arrive in Hong Kong, you touch base, you're legalized, you're considered legal. I was taken to my mother's sister, and she paid $370 for the smugglers. Later, I found out how poor my mother's sister was. She and her husband was living in a bed among many beds in a compound. So they had the food cooked next to the bed and all that. They're very poor people.
Their poverty meant that Jimmy was sent to work the same night he arrived in the Kowloon district of Hong Kong.
I was taken to a factory to work as an object worker. And I was very happy in the morning. I smell a lot of food that I never smell, the great aroma of food and the manager gave me $10. That was a lot of money at that time, and I was very happy. It's as if I arrived in heaven, although, as a young kid, we had to wake up before 7. We got to whip the floor, finish everything, open the door before 8 o'clock people come, and then we work until 10 o'clock. But it was a very happy time. It was a time that I know I had a future. I know I was chosen. Well, we eat and sleep in the factory. Because in the evening, in the packing department, you just put a few chairs together and sleep. I remember every night, it was so tired that my back is always aching. But every morning I wake up, it's okay. I feel okay.
Lai soon noticed that those who were getting ahead spoke English. He began working with an old man to learn the rudiments of the language. By the time he left the factory at age 14, Lai could read and converse in English. At 18, he landed a job as a garment salesman. His work eventually took him to New York City.
It was something very funny, I landed in New York, and it was almost like, what I saw in the movie, the big buildings, big cars. It was a wonderful time, it was very constructive. I learned almost everything I learned to build the foundation of my life from there, Well, I had a mentor who was a very good salesman that I met. And actually I stayed with him and his wife. So one day he told me, he said, look, Jimmy, I taught you everything you had to learn as a salesman. If you want to go further in the life, you got to be educated, you got to have an intellectual pursuit. I'm going to take you to one of my friend's house for dinner tonight. It was 1967. It was a Tuesday night. I was invited to a retired Jewish lawyer's house for dinner. After dinner, because during dinner, I was speaking rubbish. So when I left, he took a book from the bookshelf and gave it to me and said that, read this, it's good for you. And the book's name is called The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. The book changed my life.
Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek had written The Road to Serfdom near the close of World War II. He argued that the same collectivist impulse that drove National Socialism in Germany and communism in the Soviet Union also threatened democracies like Great Britain. He warned that freedom could not long survive the state's attempt to centrally plan its economy. Hayek predicted that if a democracy followed such a path to the end, it would inevitably destroy itself.
You read between the lines of his passion for freedom is like almost like religious. You know, this is fantastic. You know, it's so uplifting for me.
For Hayek, the state, not just individuals, could violate the rule of law. He maintained that government efforts to dictate economic equality did not extend the rule of law, but destroyed it. Hayek compared the rule of law to a state providing road signs, but without commanding people which road to take. Only if the state accepts its limited role can real freedom prosper. The book's passionate case for freedom lit a fire in the young salesman. On his return to Hong Kong, Jimmy Lai landed a job as a manager in a garment factory, eventually earned a large bonus, and then used the money to begin trading in the stock market.
I got a bonus of 7,000 Hong Kong. It was not enough to start a business. So I said, okay, look, let's try my luck and speculate in the stock market. If I'm lucky, I make some money, and then I start my own business. And then before I did it, I bought a lot of books about, you know, stock market books to know how to speculate.
Lai proved himself an astute investor and quickly built a nest egg. With his profits and a wealthy partner, he soon had the capital to think big.
I really like to create things. I got a rich friend of mine who's my partner, whose father can sign a personal guarantee to get some money from the bank. So that works out, and then that's how I built the factory, and then I went into the retailing business.
From manufacturing, he moved into retail. In 1981, he founded a clothing chain, Giordano, which he named after an Italian restaurant in the United States. The company quickly expanded from Hong Kong into mainland China. Within a decade, Giordano had over 200 stores and was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Lai had made it in one of the most competitive clothing markets on the planet. His success might have marked the beginning of a long final phase of his career, the ongoing management of an established enterprise. But then came the pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square.
When I first noticed what happened in Tiananmen, I was very moved. I always tried to run away from China since the time that I escaped from it. Anything China represents is something that I want to forget. I want to be keeping as long a distance from it as possible, at least emotionally. It's something becoming very disgusting for me. Actually, I didn't feel anything about China until Tiananmen Square happened. All of a sudden, it's like my mother was calling in the darkness of the night. And my heart opened up. It's like going back to the warmth of your mother. I was very excited. I wanted to get involved. So I gave money, I gave t-shirts, I do a lot of things. I had banners in my shop, you know, asked Deng Xiaoping to resign, and then print those Tiananmen Square heroes in the t-shirt and sold it at a very cheap price. So I was doing a lot of things. I got involved and I was very excited, and that's why I went into the media business.
Shortly after the Tiananmen Square massacre, Lai launched a monthly magazine, Next, and quickly established its independent credentials.
I asked myself, you know, I make enough money If I just go on making money, it doesn't mean anything to me. But if I go into the media business, that I deliver information, which is choice, and choice is freedom. I was thrilled by the idea that, I can be part of the institution that is delivering freedom to a society like China. Of course, that which was a misconception. I thought China, after the June 4th massacre, will be open up to the world and to freedom for its people. It hasn't yet. But not that, we don't have to persist. We have to persist.
The Hong Kong media avoided criticizing the Chinese Communist leadership, but Lai refused to play it safe, even going so far as to criticize Premier Li Peng for his role in the Tiananmen Square massacre. It was a fateful decision.
I wrote a letter, an open letter to Li Peng, and said some harsh things about him. We had shops in China, and we were threatened that, if I still own the company, they're going to close down the shops in China. So one day I was in Paris, in the morning, 6:30, I received a call from the then CEO and saying that, look, Jimmy, you got to sell your share in the company. The greatest potential is in China, and if our doors close there, we're finished, we're toast. So I said, go ahead, sell it.
A year after the Chinese government forced him out of Giordano, Jimmy Lai launched a newspaper, Apple Daily. Undeterred by the attack on his interests, Lai pushed his writers to practice a blend of consumer and muckraking journalism. Despite some costly setbacks, a decade later, he expanded into Taiwan. Apple and Next are now among the leaders of the crowded Hong Kong and Taiwanese media markets. A media magnate, a merchant banker, a compost farmer. Each a fascinating bundle of strengths and weaknesses, of motives and talents. They and countless other entrepreneurs create wealth every day, fundamentally transforming our world. And yet, even economists who prize the market economy can overlook the role of the entrepreneur.
When we think about contemporary economics, we have this vision of the world as being somehow mathematically orientated. And that's something that we get from people like Newton, who were looking for these laws that governed the universe in a very strict, unmoving way.
Economists are constantly creating economic models that consist of lots of simultaneously computed equations that simulate economic activity. They tend to eclipse the entrepreneur.
You can't determine beforehand what the entrepreneur is going to do, what he's going to create. If you open up an economics textbook, you're not going to find some supply-demand chart with an E variable for the entrepreneur. You can only see what the entrepreneur does after the fact.
Part of the problem is that the defenders of capitalism have always exalted free markets rather than free men or free inventors or free creators.
Capitalism begins with enterprise. It doesn't begin with markets. It begins only when people look around, see what needs to be done or could be done, and then have the stick-to-itiveness and the creativity to make it work. Find a way to make it work over all obstacles.
The entrepreneurs we remember are the great inventors, since we can easily see how their inventions produce new wealth. But most entrepreneurs create new wealth in another less tangible way, by orchestrating the creativity of others.
You know, if you think of an orchestra, you see all of these different individual people engaged in some kind of activity. The violinist, the cellist, the oboe player, the person on the drums or percussion. All of them, left to their own devices, would create cacophony. But the impresario oversees all of this, understands the various aspects, may not be able to play the violin as well as the first violinist, may not be able to play the percussion, but has an overall vision of where this thing needs to go and proceeds in harmonious action to hold back the one and bring in the other, and then bring them together to produce the harmony that we know as beautiful music. People think of entrepreneurship as essentially an individualistic enterprise. You know, the impresario, the conductor, can't conduct a symphony without the orchestra. And the entrepreneur, as entrepreneur, cannot produce the kind of wealth that's needed without the talent of many people, many of whom he will never meet, and many of whose languages he cannot speak.
An entrepreneur is the creative force in economics. The entrepreneur is the person who comes and looks at a desert or a jungle or a wilderness and sees a garden, sees an opportunity to create new value.
I learned risk without knowing that it's a risk. Taking risk is actually dashing into hope. You're just dashing into the future and hoping that it's going to be better.
When I look at the business successes that we have had, I look and I see failure after failure, because you can't predict the future perfectly.
And then when the checkbook doesn't balance and there isn't enough money to go around, and I mean you're constantly fighting the financial battles that we was fighting, it puts a lot of stress on the family. On the other hand, I look back today and I wouldn't rewrite that book for no love nor money.
The successful entrepreneur is the one who stays hopeful and stays flexible and stays adaptable.
Are we successful? Yeah, but I'm not sure it all revolves around money. My success will be measured when I'm long gone. I have visions of a grandchild or 2 or 3 actually being involved in something that I built. If you have a vision, go for it. If any one of these kids come up with an idea or a project, I'll support them 100%. But if you can do it and do it well.
You could really think of the first farmers as the first entrepreneurs. It was farmers, after all, and farms that made the first cities possible. And it was those cities that made the great civilizations possible. And it was those civilizations that made things like worldwide commerce, and science, and technology, and music, and philosophy possible.
Without the entrepreneur, economies are barren, they're dead.
Prominent moral and religious leaders point to capitalists who have cheated employees, deceived consumers, and poisoned the environment, and conclude that business is inherently selfish. Others argue that while no entrepreneur is immune to corruption, the entrepreneurial impulse springs from something good, even divine, within us.
I'm not saying by this that a person who is a successful entrepreneur is necessarily doing the will of God or is intentionally doing the will of God, but I'm saying that there's something there embedded in the very action that speaks to us of the creation.
I think that most entrepreneurs are motivated by the sheer excitement of creating something that's new, the sense that they are, in some respects, participating in God's original creative act.
When we think about God, the very first thing we know about God was that He created something. Is money involved? Sure, money's involved. That's part of our business world and part of the physical world we inhabit. But that's not what in the end motivates and calls to the entrepreneur. What calls to the entrepreneur is this creative energy, this inspirational impulse, this desire to make something where nothing existed.
When God fashions man from the dust of the earth and breathes into him the breath of life and speaks those first words of vocation to the human family, he, in effect, is inviting the human family to be co-creators with him, not co in the sense of equal, but co in the sense of cooperating, working with him in the continuation of the creation of the world. What an awesome vocation that is.